We are live with Babu Chimata. Babu, how are you? So, for many years, you have been a leader in cloud technology. You've been at Blue Cross for the last 2 or 3 years, and prior to that at Zurich um, Insurance. Are you known as a cloud engineer? What is your title when you're out at these places?
Um, Primarily, it's the cloud architecture or cloud specialist. Um, and for Blue Cross, actually, it's been cloud and security architecture and implementation.
Okay. In how much is the cloud integrated into the security work today? Is it because development happens and ends up in the cloud that it's a key part of the security plan these days? Is how the cloud DevOps or cloud development is done and deployed?
Um, Actually, all of the items that actually you talked about, because the applications are deployed actually into the cloud. So once they're deployed, the applications run in the cloud. The data is in the cloud, so that makes it um, very essential, like, to have a security first architecture. So security is um, pretty much like, ingrained right from the aspect of actually development to all the way up to deployment and running the workloads and protecting the workloads once actually they are in the cloud. The architecture becomes very essential because many of these applications are also on the cloud. So the applications, how we architect them, how we integrate them, and how we build the security layers, like, for the infrastructure, for the data, and for governance, all of those layers of the same security architectural components.
It's interesting, this talk of security. I remember 10 years ago working with many healthcare organizations, and they were completely set against going to the cloud because they were very worried about the security of taking your applications and your data and putting them in the cloud. And it almost feels to me like in today's world, people feel like the cloud is inherently more secure than the old on-prem. Is it inherently more secure or less secure than on-prem in your opinion, Babu?
I think my opinion is like, it largely depends on the architecture and the security principles that are applied. But what the cloud gives is that, it essentially gives us like the Swiss Army knife kind of tool set, and it's up to us to design and implement. And if we implement it right, with proper security controls in place and proper processes in place, it is actually going to be far more secure than traditional implementations. But at the same time, if I don't care for the security controls as much, then if I'm going to take whatever actually it is out of the box or the default controls in place, then I may be leaving doors open.
Hmm.
That is where actually the cloud security, or the aspects of the cloud security play a pivotal role, is because the security has to be thought of right from the get-go. It is not just actually deploying something in the cloud and running it. There is this component of, we use the DevOps, right? DevOps is that, developers are coding, they're getting built, and they're pushed into the, deployment environments that could be cloud or that could be on-prem. But with cloud coming in, the DevSecOps is important. So that is one facet of the security. In the DevSecOps, there is a security component in the DevOps. And that is where actually we check the infrastructure. What infrastructure are we going to build? What kind of code is going in? Are they secure? Is the security configuration or the infrastructure security is complying to the policies actually that were designed for an organization? And all of those actually goes into the DevSecOps, which generally in the security world, it's also refers to as the shift left, meaning I'm pushing a lot of responsibility towards the left, which is where the development is happening or at the time of development. I'm not going to wait until the development is complete and the code is pushed, then I go figure out there is something wrong, like in here, right? There is a vulnerability that we need to address, or there are infrastructure components that are actually misconfigured. If you remember, Kelly, many of the data breaches that happened over the last few years, I think even there are a couple cases that were actually in the news that they were actually the root cause for some of them is how the storage buckets were configured. They're misconfigured. So if somebody doesn't notice, how those buckets actually were configured, that then they're prone to threats from the we are keeping it exposed. So this is where the shift left, for example, that is when some development team or developers are trying to build storage buckets, the controls are in place that a bucket would be created based on the policies or the compliance requirements that are set by an organization, then enforced. So there is no way actually a developer would be able to go create a bucket of their choice, right? They have to comply to those standards. Once the bucket is implemented, let's say in the cloud, or a bucket or infrastructure resource, then there is a security posture that is actually managed, so that if somebody to monitor that no one else is going and tinkering with that. So if somebody tinkers with it or updated those permissions or the policies, they're going to be monitored and they're going to be alerted. They're going to be remediated. So I mean, this is how so the same case of so can those data breaches could have been secured if an organization has a pretty well documented or controls and regulations in place? Yes, I think so there are actually tools that is where we hear the word CNAP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platforms. That's where they help, and that is what actually these days when we talk about cloud security is how do we use the CNAP kind of solutions and implement them from shift left, from at the time of development to the deployment, and after deploying, how do we monitor and protect the workloads. And even after deploying, let's say I deployed an application, right? Today, actually, I think everything is okay, right? Everything looks fine and rosy. But after a few months, we might figure out some of the components that I'm using, they're vulnerable. So they found because that's what happens. A lot of the software libraries, the developers use is that the vulnerabilities would be discovered at a later date, some other time. And how do we manage them? First of all, detecting, I am using a library X 1.2, and 6 months down the road, I found the vulnerability saying that this 1.2 version has a vulnerability that needs to be addressed. So I need some kind of monitoring tools to figure out that hey, in my environment, there is an application that is using this 1.2 library. Log4j was an example. like in a couple of years back, and if so, then how do we go patch it? How do I upgrade it? How do I remediate it? And that gets into the vulnerability management, workload protection, vulnerability management. The vulnerabilities can happen within the application or within the OSs. So because when we, again, going back to your earlier question about, when we use the word cloud security as a general container, it is everything. If the development is happening there, like the responsibility protecting and trying to detect any issues, like early actually becomes the responsibility. Like the sooner we detect, the less prone we are.
Right.
And also the sooner we detect, the cost of ownership is also going to be reduced.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's where the DevOps, DevSecOps, and the shift left comes into play.
Is there, do any of the three primary leaders in cloud technology, do they have a leg up when it comes to the security side, or is there AI that's being developed by one of the three that is helping discover vulnerabilities? Maybe all of them are working on AI in that regard, but when you say that the most secure cloud platform is Microsoft Azure clearly the most secure, or is AWS, or are they all have their own
I think,
vulnerabilities?
I mean, just taking out of the box, all of them, by nature, they give us a good tool set. It's up to us to go and implement them. Meaning how I use it, both Google, Azure, and AWS, they all have tool sets. I had to go use it. For example, if I'm creating a storage account that is publicly exposed as an organization or as a team, I can't blame actually the cloud provider for it. It is me actually that created it. Now, are there actually tools like that can actually check those such kind of things doesn't happen? Meaning, I could go create an EC2, and run it and have a public IP, or I could create a bucket, S3 bucket, or an Azure storage account and expose them publicly. But if there are tools, or if my organization's mandate is like there shouldn't be any resource that should be publicly exposed, then somebody has to go monitor them. And the cloud providers could give some tools actually to monitor them. But it's up to us to use it.
Right.
And this is where, there are actually the third-party actually vendors, like the Palo Alto Networks is one of them. They have an integrated suite of tools actually that makes it a little bit easy, but that has to be accounted as part of the application design and architecture itself, and it has to be from the ground up.
Perfect.
So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You absolutely did. That and it makes sense that they all are focused on security, but you have to use what's provided. So that answer, was exactly answered what I was looking for there. Well, Babu Chimata, thank you so much. You are a wealth of information, and it's always on a personal level. It's always wonderful to see your face and to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. And for everyone else out there, you're watching the vodcast.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it.